The rain had started earlier than usual that evening, drumming softly against the windshield of Brent Carter's sleek black car as he turned into the long driveway of his mansion. The house, lit with a warm glow that usually promised peace and comfort, felt strangely cold as he pulled up. He hadn't planned to come home yet. Business meetings had been canceled at the last minute, and he thought surprising his daughter Ella would bring her joy. Instead, something in the air told him this night would be different. As Brent stepped out, the smell of wet earth and trimmed hedges filled his senses, but beneath it all was a silence that unsettled him. He expected laughter, perhaps Ella's light steps running down the stairs to greet him, or the faint hum of music playing from the kitchen. Instead, he was met with stillness, broken only by the patter of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. He pushed open the heavy front door, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor, and then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. It wasn't just crying. It was broken sobbing, sharp and uneven, the kind that slices through a parent's chest like glass. Brent froze, his heart hammering. That sound didn't belong in this house. Ella's voice, usually sweet and full of life, now trembled with fear. "Daddy," she whimpered faintly from somewhere deeper inside. The briefcase slipped from Brent's grip, crashing onto the floor with a deafening thud. Papers scattered, but he barely noticed. He was already striding forward, his eyes sharp, every muscle tense. His mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Was she hurt? Had she fallen? Was someone inside who shouldn't be? The mansion suddenly felt too big, every shadow holding menace. The sobs grew louder as he reached the staircase. He quickened his pace, the polished banister reflecting his stiff silhouette. And then he saw Rella was crouched near the bottom of the stairs, small arms wrapped tightly around her head, her face wet with tears. She looked terrified, like a fragile bird trapped in a storm. And standing beside her was Maya Williams, the housekeeper who had been with them for over a year. In one hand, Maya clutched Ella's arm. In the other, a white towel, stained with a glaring streak of red. For one long, agonizing moment, Brent's world stood still. His lungs refused to fill with air. His pulse roared in his ears. He saw Ella's flushed cheeks, the bruise swelling near her temple, the blood darkening the towel, and then rage surged through him like wildfire. "Let go of my daughter right now!" His voice thundered through the grand hall, sharp, commanding, full of fury that echoed against the marble walls. His eyes narrowed into knives, locking onto Maya. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on the room until every breath was heavy. Maya gasped, her face draining of color. Her trembling fingers released Ella instantly, and the little girl bolted, running straight into Brent's arms. She clung to him desperately, her sobs shaking her small frame, as if she believed he was the only safe harbor left in the world. Brent lowered himself to her level, holding her close, his heart cracking at the sight of the bruise on her forehead. His chest tightened with every shaky breath she took, and he gently brushed the wet strands of hair from her face. He pressed a tender kiss to her temple, whispering softly, "Daddy's here. I won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he tried to comfort her, his eyes lifted, cold, burning with unspoken questions, back to Maya. His jaw clenched, his voice quivering with rage as it broke the silence. "What happened? What did you do to my daughter?" And in that charged second, standing between innocence and accusation, Brent Carter felt the walls of his soul perfect world beginning to crack. Brent's voice cut through the air like a whip, and the silence that followed was suffocating. The grand hall, usually a place of warmth and elegance, suddenly felt like a courtroom where Maya stood trial under his burning gaze. His daughter clutched his chest, trembling, her tiny fingers digging into his shirt as if letting go would mean losing him forever. Maya's lips parted, but for a moment, no words came out. She looked pale, her dark eyes wide with fear and pain. The bloodied towel hung limply in her hand, dripping faintly onto the polished floor. At last she managed to stammer, her voice weak, desperate. "Brent, please listen. Ella slipped in the bathroom. I was only trying to help her. I never meant—" "Don't!" Brent's command exploded in the room, sharper than thunder. He stepped forward, shielding Ella behind him as though Maya were a predator ready to pounce. His eyes were cold, unforgiving. "Don't you dare make excuses. My daughter is bruised, she's terrified, and I walk in to see you clutching her with blood in your hands. Do you really expect me to believe this was some kind of accident?" Ella sniffled, her sobs still shaking her fragile body. Brent lowered his face to hers, brushing away her tears with a trembling hand. "It's all right, baby," he murmured gently. "Daddy's here now. Tell me exactly what happened. Don't be afraid." The little girl hesitated, her eyes darting nervously to Maya, who stood frozen like a shadow against the staircase. Ella's lips quivered, and then, in a trembling whisper, she spoke. It was Maya. She got mad at me because I broke the vase. She hit me with the towel. The words struck Brent harder than any blow could. His breath caught, his entire body stiffening. His arms instinctively tightened around Ella as if to shield her from further harm. Slowly, his head turned back to Maya, his expression dark, disbelief, of hardening into something even more dangerous, certainty. Maya's mouth fell open. She staggered a step back, shaking her head furiously, her voice cracking with anguish. "No, Ella, that's not true. Why would you say that? I would never hurt you. You know that." "Enough!" Brent's roar silenced everything. Even the rain outside seemed to pause at the sheer force of it. His words dripped with venom, each syllable carrying the weight of betrayal. "I don't want to hear another word from you. Not one. You're out of here, Maya. Do you understand me? Out. And don't you ever set foot in this house again." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, spilling freely as she pressed a hand to her chest, as if to hold her breaking heart together. She wanted to explain, to scream her innocence, but Brent's glare pinned her to the spot. Under that cold, merciless stare, her voice died in her throat. She turned, every step heavy, her dignity shattering with each echo of her shoes against the marble floor. The front door creaked, then slammed shut with a violent finality that made Ella flinch in her father's arms. And just like that, the woman who had cared for them for more than a year, who had once felt like family, was gone, cast out as though she were nothing but a stain on the Carter household. The mansion grew eerily quiet, save for the sound of Ella's sobs muffled against Brent's chest. He rocked her gently, pressing his lips against her hair, but his own heart was raging. Trust had been broken, innocence stained, and he could not erase the image of Maya's trembling hands and the towel soaked in blood. "Daddy will protect you," he whispered again, though the words were as much a vow to himself as to his child. Still, deep inside, unease gnawed at him, an unease he refused to name, because to name it would mean questioning everything he thought he knew. And yet, as Brent carried Ella upstairs to her room, shadows seemed to follow them. Something about the night felt wrong, incomplete, as though the truth had been left behind in the rain-soaked silence where Maya had stood. But Brent refused to look back. Not yet. The drive to St. Agnes Memorial Hospital was cloaked in silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every heartbeat sound louder. Rain streaked across the windshield in relentless sheets, and the rhythmic hiss of the wipers only heightened Brent's tension. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Beside him, Ella sat curled in the passenger seat, her small frame dwarfed by the leather seat. She rested her head against the window, eyes half closed, clutching her favorite pink blanket as though it were the only anchor left in her world. Brent glanced at her, his chest tightening at the sight of the bruise swelling on her forehead. The pale glow of passing streetlights illuminated her tear-streaked cheeks, and guilt stabbed him. How many times had he been too consumed by work to notice the little details in her life? The scratches, the sudden silences, the moments when she seemed distant? He swallowed hard, anger burning anew. He told himself he'd failed her once by trusting the wrong person. He would never fail her again. By the time they reached the hospital, the rain had eased into a mist. Brent carried Ella in his arms through the sliding glass doors, ignoring the curious stares of patients and nurses in the waiting area. His voice was urgent, commanding. "She needs to be seen immediately." Within minutes, Dr. Joanna Bennett, a respected pediatric specialist, appeared. She was calm, composed, her tone soothing as she led them into an exam room. Brent stayed close, his arms folded tightly across his chest as he watched every movement. He could feel his pulse hammering in his temples, each second stretching unbearably as Dr. Bennett examined Ella with careful precision. "Ella, sweetheart, can you tell me where it hurts?" "TC toi," he doctor asked gently, her gloved hands cool as they brushed against Ella's forehead. Ella winced, but whispered softly, "Here, and sometimes my arm." Brent's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, kneeling beside his daughter, stroking her hair. "It's okay, baby. Just tell the doctor everything. Daddy's right here." Dr. Bennett's brow furrowed as she continued her examination. She moved with deliberate care, but Brent saw every frown, every pause, and each one felt like a dagger to his chest. Finally, she removed her gloves and turned to him, her expression grave. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment." Brent's heart skipped. He kissed Ella's forehead and whispered, "I'll be right outside," before following Dr. Bennett into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing Ella in. "What's wrong, doctor?" Brent asked, his voice taut, almost breaking. Dr. Bennett took a deep breath, her eyes holding his with professional seriousness. I examined the injury on Ella's forehead. Yes, it looks recent and consistent with a fall, but I also found evidence of older bruises on her arms, her legs, even one healing near her ribs. Some are days old, maybe even a week. These aren't consistent with just one accident. Her words landed like a blow to Brent's chest. His breath caught. His body stiffened. What are you saying? I cannot say for certain, Dr. Bennett continued, but these patterns are often consistent with repeated rough handling or abuse by an adult. By law, I'm required to report this to Child Protective Services. They'll follow up with an investigation. Do you understand? For a moment, the hallway spun. Brent pressed a hand against the wall, his vision narrowing as images flashed through his mind. Maya clutching Ella with that bloodied towel, Ella's frightened eyes, her trembling voice claiming Maya had hurt her, his jaw clenched, fury and heartbreak swirling into a storm he couldn't contain. I understand, he said at last, his voice clipped, icy. His eyes blazed with determination. Call them, and while you do, I'll be calling the police. Dr. Bennett nodded, her face unreadable, then turned back toward the exam room. Brent stayed behind, his heart pounding with a dangerous mix of rage and despair. He could barely breathe, yet one thought anchored him with cruel certainty. He had trusted Maya with his most precious treasure, and now the cost of that trust was carved into his daughter's fragile skin. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling but resolute, dialing the police. His voice, low but fierce, carried only one demand. I want charges filed, tonight. And as the words left his lips, he didn't see that somewhere beyond the hospital's glass doors, hidden in the shadows of the parking lot, a figure stood watching. Linda Hartman's smile curved coldly in the darkness. Her plan was unfolding flawlessly. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Brent carried Ella back into the mansion later that night, but the storm inside his chest raged on. He set her gently in her bed, tucking the pink blanket up to her chin, brushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. She was exhausted, her eyelids fluttering shut almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. Brent lingered at her side, his hand resting protectively on her tiny arm, but his mind was elsewhere, looping over the doctor's words, the bruises, the bloodied towel, and Maya's desperate denials. Downstairs, the house seemed cavernous, the silence broken only by the ticking clock above the fireplace. Brent poured himself a drink but left it untouched, staring instead at the dark window pane that reflected his hollow eyes. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Billionaire, businessman, father, none of it mattered when it came to protecting his little girl. What Brent didn't know was these. At just beyond those same rain-slicked windows, hidden in the shadows of a parked car across the street, another pair of eyes watched him closely. Linda Hartman leaned back against the leather seat, her lips curved into a cold, satisfied smile. She had been there when Maya ran out earlier, drenched in rain, tears streaking her face as she clutched the bloodied towel like damning evidence. And she had been there now, watching Brent pace, drink in hand, consumed with guilt and fury. Everything was falling into place exactly as she had designed. She lifted her phone and pressed a number. A man's voice crackled on the other end. It's done? Better than we planned, Linda whispered, her tone sharp with triumph. Brent believes Maya is guilty. The police will be circling soon. The perfect setup, all without lifting a finger inside that house. The man chuckled darkly, but Linda's eyes stayed fixed on the mansion's glowing windows. Brent Carter has always been untouchable, she said, her voice tightening. Too powerful, too respected. But every giant falls, and tonight we've planted the seed. Maya's reputation will be shattered, and Brent? He'll tear himself apart trying to protect a lie. She ended the call and exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no trace of guilt. To her, this was more than personal. It was a legacy. For too long, she had watched Brent's name dominate Glendale's business world, his influence outshining even the Hartman families. And Maya? A maid elevated to trust, a black woman inside a house that should have been untouchable. That was an insult Linda would never allow to stand. Back inside, Brent dropped heavily into his armchair, running his hands over his face. He could still see Maya's eyes wide with disbelief, her voice trembling as she begged him to believe her. Something in her expression had struck him, a flicker of innocence that nagged at the back of his mind. But he shoved it away, convincing himself it was only an act. His daughter's words mattered more than anything. He couldn't risk doubting her, not when her safety was at stake. Still, unease lingered. He replayed Ella's broken whisper, "She hit me with the towel." The words had come out too quickly, almost rehearsed. Brent shook his head violently, refusing to entertain the thought. No, he couldn't question it. He had to act, had to protect. Above him, the storm clouds parted just enough for moonlight to spill through the tall windows, illuminating the lonely figure of a father who thought he had done the right thing. But outside, Linda Hartman's engine purred to life, her smile lingering as she drove away into the night. The game had only just begun, and Brent Carter, with all his wealth and pride, had no idea he was already a pawn on her board. The house was too quiet the next morning. Not the calm, comfortable silence Brent was used to, but the heavy kind that presses down like a weight you can't shake off. The mansion's wide halls, with their gleaming marble and spotless walls, felt colder than ever. Brent sat at the breakfast table, his untouched coffee growing cold beside him, his mind a restless storm. Upstairs, Ella hadn't woken at her usual hour. No footsteps running down the staircase, no giggles, no chatter about what she wanted for breakfast. Brent climbed the stairs, each creak echoing like a reminder of how empty the house now felt without Maya. When he opened Ella's bedroom door, he found her sitting cross-legged on her bed, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her big brown eyes looked swollen from crying, and she wouldn't meet his gaze. "Good morning, sweetheart," Brent said softly, pulling a chair close to her bed. His voice carried more gentleness than it had in weeks, but it still wavered. "How are you feeling?" Ella gave a small shrug, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of her blanket. Her silence made Brent's chest ache. He reached out, brushing her hair away from her face. "Talk to me, Ella. Please. I can't help you if I don't know what's going on." She bit her lip, her tiny hands trembling as though she were holding back something too heavy for her small heart. Then suddenly her eyes welled with tears and her little chest began to shake. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. Brent's heart tightened. He leaned closer, stroking her back. "What is it, baby? Tell Daddy. You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm here." The words seemed to shatter whatever wall she had built. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing into his shirt, her tiny fists gripping him as if she were afraid he might disappear. Her voice came out between hiccups and gasps. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I lied." For a moment, Brent froze. The words didn't register. He held her tighter, confusion flashing across his face. "What do you mean, Ella? Lied about what?" Her tear-streaked face turned up toward him, guilt etched into every feature. "Maya didn't hurt me. She didn't. I broke the vase that Mommy left behind and I was scared you'd be angry. I thought you wouldn't love me anymore. So I said Maya hit me. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to. Please don't hate me." The room seemed to collapse around Brent. His breath caught in his throat, his chest hollowing as her confession echoed in his ears. He stared at his daughter, unable to move, unable to speak. Maya's face flashed in his mind, her trembling hands, her desperate pleas, her wide, tearful eyes, the towel, the way she had fled, broken, into the rain, and he had believed the worst of her without hesitation. Brent's arms tightened around Ella, his own tears burning his eyes. "Ella," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I could never stop loving you, never. But why didn't you tell me the truth sooner?" She buried her face in his chest, sobbing harder. Because I was scared, Daddy. Scared you'd be mad at me for breaking Mommy's vase. Scared you'd be mad at me for lying. I didn't want you to hate me." Brent's heart fractured completely. He kissed the top of her head again and again, whispering through his own despair. "Oh, sweetheart, nothing you do could ever make me hate you. This isn't your fault. This is mine. I should have listened. I should have trusted better." But as he held his trembling daughter, guilt carved deep lines into his heart. He had condemned an innocent woman. He had cast Maya out, humiliated her, judged her not by her actions but by his own fears and prejudice. His pride, his rashness, his blindness, it had destroyed someone who had only ever cared for his child. He rocked Ella gently until her sobs softened, but his own thoughts were far from calm. Regret churned inside him, threatening to consume him whole. And when he looked out the window, the drizzle tapping against the glass, he realized it was too late to undo the moment when he had slammed the door on Maya. The question now burned inside him like fire. Could she ever forgive him, or had he lost her forever? Brent drove through Glendale with a restless urgency, the city's neon lights blurring into streaks through the windshield. His chest was tight, his mind drowning in Ella's confession. Every word she had spoken replayed like a cruel echo. Maya didn't hurt me. I lied. The guilt was unbearable. He had taken the word of a frightened child over the truth of a woman who had cared for Ella like her own. Worse still, he hadn't even paused to question his judgment. He had acted like a judge, jury, and executioner, fueled by pride, fear, and a prejudice he never wanted to admit lived inside him. Her face haunted him, The look in Maya's eyes when he had accused her, the devastation when she realized his trust was gone. She had left in tears, rain clinging to her clothes, stripped of her dignity, branded a monster in the very home where she had given so much of herself. Brent's hands tightened around the wheel. He had to make it right, no matter the cost. By the time he pulled up outside Maya's apartment building, the night had grown colder. The place was nothing like the Carter mansion. Cracked walls, flickering streetlights, broken mailboxes. Brent's chest ached as he thought of the contrast. She had lived here, worked tirelessly in his home, and loved his daughter, and he had repaid her with suspicion and cruelty. He climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, each step heavier than the last. At her door he paused, heart pounding. He hesitated for the first time all evening, fear knotting in his stomach. What if she refused to see him? What if it was already too late? He pressed the doorbell anyway, the faint chime echoing inside. Moments later, the door opened a crack. Maya stood there, her face pale, eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. She wore a simple sweater, damp at the sleeves, her hair tied back loosely as if she hadn't cared to fix it. When her gaze fell on him, the warmth that had once lived there was gone, replaced by a cold wall of hurt. "What are you doing here, Mr. Carter?" Her voice was low, edged with ice. "Didn't you say you never wanted to see me again?" Brent swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Maya, please. I came to apologize. I was wrong, so wrong. Ella told me the truth. She lied because she was afraid of me, afraid of disappointing me. You didn't hurt her. I see that now. Stop." Maya's tone was sharp, her hands trembling at her sides. She opened the door wider, her pain spilling out in her trembling words. "Do you know what you did to me, Brent? You looked me in the eye and decided I was guilty. You didn't give me a chance to explain. You saw my skin, my place in your house, and you made up your mind. All the trust I thought I'd earned, it meant nothing to you." Her words hit him like blows. Brent felt the ground tilt beneath him, shame flushing his face. "You're right," he whispered, voice breaking. "I let my fear and my pride blind me. I hurt you in ways I can never take back, but I need you to know, I am sorry, truly. I will do anything to make this right." Maya shook her head, tears spilling again, though her voice was steady. "Sorry doesn't erase what you said. Sorry doesn't undo the way you stripped me of my dignity. You made me feel like I was nothing more than a servant who could be tossed aside at the first sign of trouble." Brent's eyes burned. "Maya, please. I'll do whatever it takes. Ella loves you. She misses you. I miss you. Don't let my mistake end everything we built." Her gaze softened for just a fraction of a second at the mention of Ella, but then hardened again. She wrapped her arms around herself as though shielding her heart. "I love Ella more than anything, but I can't go back. Not now. Not after what you did. I need time to heal, and you need to face the prejudice you didn't even realize you carry. Until then, I can't forgive you. Not yet." Brent's chest caved under the weight of her words. He nodded slowly, tears slipping down his face. "I understand," he said hoarsely, "but I promise, Maya, I'll change. I'll prove it, no matter how long it takes. I won't give up until I've earned back your trust." The door began to close, each inch cutting deeper into his heart. Her final words slipped out, soft but resolute. "Prove it to yourself first, Brent. Only then can you prove it to me." And then the door shut, leaving him in the dim hallway, surrounded by silence and the crushing weight of regret. Brent didn't sleep that night. The mansion felt like a hollow shell without Maya's quiet presence in the halls. He wandered from room to room, stopping often in Ella's doorway just to hear her gentle breathing. Every time he looked at her, the guilt stabbed deeper. He had promised to protect her, and yet his fear and rashness had destroyed the person who had truly loved her as if she were her own. By dawn, Brent was sitting in his study, the blinds half closed, his face bathed in the cold blue light of his computer screen. A glass of untouched whiskey sat on the desk beside him. He stared at the blinking cursor on an empty post, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Billionaires like him weren't supposed to admit mistakes, not in business, not in public, and certainly not when it came to matters of the heart. But Brent knew the truth. If he stayed silent, the damage would only deepen. Slowly, he began to type. "I, Brent Carter, owe an apology to Maya Williams. I wrongfully accused her of hurting my daughter. I let my fear and prejudice blind me, and I condemned her without giving her a chance to explain. Maya has been nothing but loyal and loving to my child, and my actions hurt her deeply. I take full responsibility for my mistake. From this day forward, I vow to confront the prejudices I've carried and to never again let them dictate my judgment. His hands shook as he pressed post. Within minutes, the response was overwhelming. Notifications poured in, lighting up his screen in a dizzying flood. Some comments praised him. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. We need more men in power owning their mistakes like this. Others were venomous. You're weak, Carter. Defending a maid over your own family's honor. Shameful. She's manipulating you. The backlash grew louder by the hour. Business associates called, their voices sharp with warning. Brent, you're risking your reputation. Take it down. Friends he'd known for years sent messages urging him to distance himself from Maya. Even his extended family sent cold emails dripping with disappointment, but none of it compared to what Maya endured. Within days, anonymous letters appeared at her apartment door, vile words scrawled across the "I'm calling her names too cruel to repeat." Her phone rang at midnight, voices whispering threats before hanging up. And one evening, when she returned from the community center where she volunteered, she found the front of her building spray-painted with hate-filled graffiti in glaring red. Get out! When Brent heard, he rushed to her side. He found her standing frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the words with tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her, as though the weight of the world had finally broken her shoulders. Maya. Brent's voice cracked as he stepped closer, reaching for her. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this for you. She turned sharply, her face streaked with rain and tears. Her voice trembled, but it cut like glass. Don't you see, Brent? Every time you try to fix your mistake, it only makes things worse for me. Your apology painted a target on my back. I can't live like this, being hated, threatened, hunted. Please, just leave me alone. Brent's chest tightened, his throat burning as her words pierced him. He wanted to argue, to beg her not to shut him out, but the devastation in her eyes silenced him. For the first time in his life, he realized that no amount of money or influence could shield someone from the cruelty of hate. As she turned away, retreating into the darkness of her building, Brent stood motionless in the rain. The city around him moved on, cars passing, lights flashing, while his world shrank to the echo of Maya's voice and the bitter knowledge that his public confession, meant to heal, had only deepened her wounds. But beneath the despair, something else stirred. Resolve. If the world wanted to turn against Maya, then it would have to go through him first. He would not stay silent again. The mansion garden had never looked so tense. Normally, it was a place of calm elegance, trimmed hedges, fountains whispering, and roses blooming under the California sun. But on that afternoon, cameras crowded every corner, reporters pressed. Against the gates, their microphones poised like weapons. The Carter estate had become a battlefield, and Brent knew he was walking straight into war. He stood tall at the podium set up near the fountain, the weight of 100 flashing lights bearing down on him. Maya stood to his left, a step back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a simple dress, her face pale but her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Though she tried to appear composed, Brent noticed the way her fingers trembled, the flicker of fear in her eyes as they scanned the restless crowd. Brent's gaze swept over the reporters, his jaw set with determination. He cleared his throat, and the murmurs silenced instantly. His voice carried across the garden, steady and strong. I know why you're all here. You've heard rumors, you've read headlines, but today, I want you to hear the truth. He paused, the gravity of his words hanging in the air. Recently, I accused Maya Williams of something she did not do. I wrongfully judged her, and my actions caused her great pain. Today, I stand here not only to admit my mistake, but to tell you this. Maya deserves respect, she deserves protection, and I will not allow anyone, any prejudice, any slander to harm her again. A ripple of murmurs surged through the crowd. Some nodded, others scribbled furiously into notepads. Brent's heart pounded, but he pressed on, his voice rising. We live in a world that often judges too quickly, that condemns without listening, that punishes people for their background, their skin, their status. I was guilty of that, and I will not be guilty again. The words felt like a confession and a vow all at once. Brent turned slightly toward Maya, his expression softening for a brief moment before facing the crowd again. He thought he saw her eyes glisten, though she quickly looked away. Just as the air seemed to shift, just as Brent felt hope stir, a sharp, cutting voice pierced through the garden. How disappointing, Brent Carter. The crowd parted as Linda Hartman strode forward, her heels clicking against the stone path like strikes of a gavel. Her expression was cold, her eyes sharp as blades. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to commanding fear and obedience. Reporters surged toward her, cameras flashing as she raised her chin high. "You really think this little performance will save your reputation?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've let this woman manipulate you, and now you tarnish the Carter name by standing beside her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya stiffened beside Brent, her face draining of color. The insult landed like a slap, but before the weight of it could crush her, Brent stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his eyes blazing. "That's enough, Linda," his voice thundered, echoing off the mansion walls. "Maya is not some pawn or manipulator. She is a woman of integrity, a woman who has cared for my daughter with more love and patience than most could ever imagine. And if you think you can belittle her here, in front of me, in front of the world, you're wrong." Linda's lips curled into a mocking smile. "And who is she really? A maid? A servant daring to stand beside the powerful? You've let pity blind you, Brent. Society will never accept someone like her in your world." The words cut deep. But this time, Maya did not shrink. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling but strong. "I don't need your acceptance. I have my dignity, and that's something no amount of power or cruelty can take away." The crowd stirred, some clapping quietly, others murmuring in shock. Linda's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking for the first time. But Brent's voice rose again, louder, unshakable. "Society will change, Linda, and it starts with moments like this, where we stop tolerating hate, where we stop allowing prejudice to define who is worth. Thy and who is not. Maya belongs here. She belongs anywhere she chooses to be." The cameras captured every word, every defiant look. The garden was electric, the air thick with the clash of old power and new resolve. For the first time, Brent and Maya stood side by side, not as employer and servant, not as accused and accuser, but as allies, united against the poison Linda Hartman had unleashed. But Brent knew this battle was only the beginning. Linda's glare, sharp as a dagger, promised vengeance. And when she turned to leave, her voice cut through the crowd one last time, cold and dangerous. "You'll regret this, Brent. Both of you will." The garden fell silent. The war had been declared. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy, a tension so thick it seemed to seep into the polished wooden walls and marble floors. Journalists crammed the benches, cameras clicked outside the doors, and whispers swirled like a rising storm. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle. The city's eyes fixed on Brent Carter and Maya Williams as they faced Linda Hartman in a battle that had already divided Glendale. Maya sat stiffly in the defendant's chair beside Brent, her hands clenched in her lap. She had dressed simply, in a navy blue blouse and modest skirt, but her posture radiated quiet strength. Still, Brent could see the way her knuckles whitened against her knees, the way her breath quickened every time a camera flash popped in the back. He wanted to reach for her hand, to whisper reassurances, but he knew this was her moment, her voice, her truth. Across the aisle, Linda Hartman sat like a queen enthroned. Her tailored white suit gleamed under the courtroom lights, her pearls resting neatly at her throat. She wore a faint, satisfied smile as though victory were already hers. To those who didn't know better, she looked calm, composed, unshakable. But Brent noticed the jalon in her eyes, sharp, predatory, calculating. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The judge entered, his presence steady and grave. As the proceedings began, the courtroom settled, though the air still hummed with unspoken anticipation. Linda's attorney, a slick man in a charcoal suit, wasted no time. He rose and approached the stand, his tone dripping with mock courtesy as Maya was sworn in. "Ms. Williams," he began, pacing slowly as though circling prey, "do you fully understand the consequences of your actions? By standing here and making these statements, you've dragged Miss Hartman's reputation through the mud. Do you realize the damage you've done?" Maya lifted her chin. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier as she spoke. "I never intended to harm anyone's reputation. What I said wasn't slander, it was my truth, the truth of what I've endured." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The attorney smirked, sensing opportunity. "Your truth? Could you elaborate for the court?" Maya's eyes swept across the sea of faces staring at her, then settled on Brent, who nodded slightly, urging her forward. She inhaled, her voice carrying more strength now. "Since I was a little girl, I have known what it is to be judged, not for what I've done, but for who I am, for the color of my skin. I've been called names, turned away from jobs, looked down on in every way you can imagine. When Mr. Carter accused me of hurting his daughter, it wasn't just about that moment. It was about every time society has assumed the worst of me simply because I am black." The silence was absolute. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, listening intently. Linda's attorney cleared his throat, his smirk faltering. So you admit it. You accused Miss Hartman of racism without evidence? I didn't accuse her, Maya said firmly, her voice steady now, ringing in the stillness. I described what I felt, the words she used, the contempt in her eyes. Those weren't just insults. They were reminders of every door that had been slammed in my face. That isn't slander. That is the truth of my experience. The lawyer chuckled lightly, trying to regain control. Or perhaps you're simply exploiting Mr. Carter's pity, climbing the social ladder on his misplaced guilt. Brent shot to his feet before he could stop himself, his voice booming across the courtroom. That's enough! All eyes snapped to him as he fixed the lawyer with a glare so fierce it silenced even the whispers. Maya has never exploited anyone. If there's a mistake here, it's mine. I was the one blinded by prejudice. I was the one who rushed to judgment. She is guilty of nothing but telling the truth. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Maya's eyes glistened, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she looked at Brent, really looked at him, and saw not just a man defending her, but a man owning his own failures before the world. Linda's calm mask cracked, her lips pressing into a thin line as she whispered furiously to her attorney. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Maya's pain. They had heard Brent's raw honesty. The narrative Linda thought she controlled was beginning to slip. And as Maya stepped down from the stand, her legs trembling but her head held high, she realized something she hadn't before. This fight wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about every moment she had been made to feel less than human. And now, standing in the heart of a courtroom, she was finally reclaiming her dignity. But Linda Hartman wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Her eyes followed Maya like daggers as the judge adjourned for the day. And in that glare was a silent vow. The real war was only beginning. That night, Brent couldn't shake the unease coiled in his chest. Even after the courtroom emptied, after Maya left with her shoulders still trembling from the weight of her testimony, he felt the echoes of Linda Hartman's glare searing into him. It wasn't just arrogance, it was confidence. The kind of confidence that only comes when you know the deck is stacked in your favor. He sat in his study long past midnight, the only light a lamp casting tired shadows across stacks of files. Papers covered his desk, witness statements, medical reports, court documents. He had read them all a dozen times, but something never felt right. The testimonies against Maya had been too smooth, too rehearsed, as if the words weren't born of truth but of careful scripting. Brent rubbed his temples, exhaustion pulling at him, but his instincts screamed. Linda wasn't just relying on her name and reputation. She was building her case with something darker, something rotten beneath the surface. The call came just as his head sank into his hands, a number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. Be careful, Carter. The voice was low, distorted, dripping menace. You're fighting forces you can't defeat. Walk away, or the people you love will pay the price. The line went dead before Brent could respond. His pulse thundered. Fear clawed at him, but beneath it, rage ignited. If Linda thought intimidation would make him run, she didn't know him at all. For the first time, he felt clarity. He couldn't just defend Maya. He had to uncover the truth. 2 hours later, Brent found himself outside the law office representing Linda. The street was quiet, the moonlight silver against glass windows. He slipped inside, heart hammering, every creak of the floorboard sounding louder than it should. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating rows of filing cabinets. He rifled through drawer after drawer, his fingers moving fast but careful. Then he found it, a locked compartment at the bottom, one that seemed too important to be ordinary storage. With a deep breath, he forced it open. Inside was a dossier. His eyes scanned quickly, bank statements, transfers to anonymous accounts, contracts signed with shaky hands, names of witnesses, large sums of money, and then the smoking gun, a printed email thread between Linda and her assistant. Her words chilled him. Make it look convincing. I don't want anyone suspecting I'm behind this. Maya must be completely ruined. Brent snapped photos with his phone, adrenaline surging through his veins. This was it, the proof they needed. But just as he closed the drawer, the office door slammed open. 2 men stepped inside, burly, shadows stretching long in the light of the hall. One growled, his voice sharp and hostile. Who's there? Brent's breath caught. He ducked behind a heavy oak desk, his pulse so loud he swore they could hear it. The men's footsteps pounded across the floor, closer and closer. One of them yanked open drawers, cursing under his breath when he saw the mess Brent had left behind. Brent knew he had seconds, maybe less. He held his breath, waiting for the right moment, then bolted. The door banged open as he sprinted into the night, his heart hammering as the men shouted behind him. He didn't stop until he reached his car, chest heaving, sweat soaking through his shirt. Safe inside, he dialed Maya immediately. "Maya," he gasped, his voice urgent. "You have to be careful. Linda isn't just lying. She's bribing witnesses, fabricating everything. I have proof, but she knows we're onto her. This is bigger than we thought." On the other end, Maya's breath hitched. Her voice was small, trembling. "Brent, I think someone's been watching me. Tonight I heard footsteps outside my door. I'm scared." His grip tightened on the wheel. "Lock everything. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm coming now." But before he could get there, before he could calm the storm building in her voice, the line went dead. And Brent knew with terrifying certainty they weren't just fighting a lawsuit anymore. They were fighting for survival. The second trial opened under a storm of anticipation. By the time Brent and Maya entered the courthouse, the marble steps were flooded with reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning. Every headline in Glendale screamed of betrayal, scandal, and power. But this time, Brent walked in with his shoulders squared, Maya at his side, and a phone full of evidence that could turn the tide. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with nervous energy. Linda Hartman sat in the defendant's chair now, her pristine white suit gleaming like armor, her chin lifted in arrogant defiance. But Brent caught the twitch in her jaw when she noticed him watching her. She knew something had changed. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. As the judge took his seat, Brent's attorney rose. "Your Honor," he began, his tone measured but firm, "we submit new evidence that directly proves Ms. Hartman fabricated testimony and bribed witnesses in order to destroy Maya Williams' reputation." A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Linda shifted in her seat, her attorney stiffening beside her. The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Brent stood, his voice steady but burning with controlled fury. He moved to the podium, holding up his phone for the court to see. "What you're about to hear are audio recordings and messages directly from Ms. Hartman to her assistant. These were obtained last night. They leave no doubt about her intentions." The room fell into absolute silence as the first recording played. Linda's voice filled the courtroom, cold and commanding. "Make it look convincing. I don't want anyone suspecting I'm behind this. Maya must be completely ruined." Gasps erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged stunned glances, and Maya sat frozen, her hands pressed together in disbelief. Brent's attorney called their first witness, Lucas Rivera, Linda's longtime personal assistant. He walked to the stand hesitantly, his face pale. But when his eyes met Brent's steady gaze, he drew a shaky breath and spoke. "I worked for Ms. Hartman for 8 years. She ordered me to bribe witnesses, fabricate documents, and provide false testimony against Maya Williams. She wanted to destroy her, not because Maya did anything wrong, but because she saw her as unworthy of being in the Carter household." The courtroom erupted in chatter. Linda sprang to her feet, her mask cracking as she shouted, "Lies! He's a traitor! You can't trust him!" "Order!" the judge barked, slamming his gavel. "Mrs. Hartman, sit down." Bank records were then displayed on the screen. Large transfers, handwritten notes, contracts, each piece stacked higher until Linda's carefully constructed facade began to crumble in front of everyone. Brent turned to the jury, his voice raw with conviction. "I was once blind enough to believe the worst about Maya, but I have seen the truth with my own eyes. The only person guilty of deceit here is Linda Hartman. Maya did nothing wrong, nothing except endure the cruelty of a society too quick to judge." The final witness was Maya herself. She walked to the stand with trembling legs but held her head high. Her voice was quiet at first, but with each word, it grew stronger. "I was accused of something I did not do. My dignity was stripped, my name dragged through the mud. But what hurt the most was knowing that my love for Ella, my care for her, was twisted into something ugly. Today, I stand not just for myself, but for every person who has been judged unfairly. We deserve truth. We deserve respect. No one should have the power to destroy another with lies." Her words lingered in the air like a prayer. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, the courtroom held its breath. "This court finds Linda Hartman guilty of fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, harassment, and intentional defamation. She will be held fully accountable under the law." The gavel struck. Linda slumped into her seat, her arrogance shattered, her empire crumbling in the eyes of the city. Beside Brent, Maya broke into quiet tears, not of sorrow, but of liberation. Brent reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, and whispered, "It's over, the truth won." But deep inside, Brent knew this wasn't the end. Winning in court was one thing, healing the wounds, rebuilding trust, and confronting the prejudice that had nearly destroyed them. That battle was still ahead. The days after the verdict unfolded like the slow lifting of a storm. Glendale buzzed with headlines about Linda Hartman's downfall, her name no longer whispered with reverence but spoken with scorn. Business partners who once bowed to her influence vanished. Old allies distanced themselves. For the first time in decades, her empire trembled, and Brent and Maya, though exhausted, stood free of her shadow. But freedom did not mean peace. Maya still carried invisible wounds. Each night, she replayed the humiliation, the threats, the fear that had seeped into her bones. Sometimes she woke in the small hours, clutching the blanket, her breath shallow, her eyes darting toward the door. And every time, Brent was there, sitting quietly beside her, whispering, "You're safe. I promise. You're safe now." For Brent, the victory was bittersweet. He had defended Maya in court, yes, but in his heart he still battled the shame of those first reckless accusations. The image of her in the rain, clutching the bloodied towel, her face twisted in disbelief as he cast her out, it haunted him. He knew no apology could erase it, yet he also knew he could spend the rest of his life proving he had learned. One afternoon, weeks later, he asked Maya to meet him at the construction site of a new project in the heart of Glendale. She arrived hesitantly, her brow furrowed, wondering why he had brought her there. The lot was busy with workers, scaffolding climbing toward the sky, the hum of machines blending with the shouts of laborers. Brent led her to a sign draped in cloth. His eyes were softer than she had ever seen, his voice steady with quiet pride. "Maya, I wanted you to see this first." With a tug, he pulled the cloth away. The words carved into the board read, "The Williams Carter Community Center." Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What? What is this?" Brent smiled faintly. "It's for families like yours. For children who grow up thinking they aren't enough. For mothers who fight battles no one else sees. For people judged too quickly, too harshly. This center will be a place where dignity is restored, where no one is turned away. I wanted to build something with you, not for you, but with you. Because you've taught me more about courage than I ever learned in boardrooms or board meetings." Her eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "Brent." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I don't expect forgiveness to come easily. I don't deserve it yet, but I want to spend whatever time I have proving that I see you, not as a maid, not as someone beneath me, but as the woman who saved my daughter's heart and, if I'm honest, saved mine too." The words cracked something inside her, not in pain, but in release. Maya's tears spilled freely, but this time they weren't born of humiliation, they were born of healing. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling but certain. "Then let's build it together." The months that followed saw the community center rise from dirt and steel into a beacon of hope. Brent poured his wealth into it, but it was Maya's voice that shaped its soul. She spoke at meetings, shared her story with donors, guided its mission. And when the doors finally opened, the entire city came, not to see a billionaire's project, but to witness a woman's triumph. That evening, after the crowd had left and the laughter of children echoed faintly in the new halls, Brent, Maya, and Ella sat on the front steps of the center. The sky burned with streaks of gold and crimson, the kind of sunset that promised new beginnings. Ella nestled against Maya's side, her small hand clutching hers tightly. "Do you think people will really change?" Maya asked softly, her eyes on the horizon. Brent glanced at her, his expression thoughtful but resolute. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with stories, with courage, with people like you who refuse to stay silent. You've already changed me, Maya. And if you can change me, you can change anyone." Maya turned her head toward him, her lips curving into the first true smile he had seen in weeks. In that moment, Brent realized something undeniable. He hadn't just rebuilt trust, he had found something deeper. Love. Ella yawned, resting her head in Maya's lap. "Maya," she murmured sleepily, "you'll always stay with us, right?" Maya brushed her fingers gently through the little girl's hair, her voice warm and sure. "Always, sweetheart. Always." Brent reached over, his hand covering Maya's, their fingers intertwining above Ella's tiny frame. The silence that settled wasn't heavy this time. It was full, rich, alive with possibility. For the first time in a long while, Brent Carter felt whole. Not because of his fortune, not because of a courtroom victory, but because he had finally chosen love over pride, truth over fear. And as the night embraced them, he knew their story was no longer about survival. It was about a family, unexpected, imperfect, but bound together by something stronger than anything Linda Hartman or the world could tear apart.